Alright guys, this one's about two-dimensional arrays. Now before we get to actually writing code with two-dimensional arrays, we might as well understand some things about it. So I'm going to draw here a random two-dimensional array, okay? So it would look something like this, okay? Before we get started though, it's a good idea to understand that two-dimensional arrays can only be used with one data type. They cannot store different values in different columns or different rows, okay? Now, this particular array I don't like. I'm going to add another row here below, okay? Or above, it doesn't matter, okay? This particular array has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows and 4 columns. Now, if I was to declare this array, and let's imagine that this array just stores a bunch of different numbers inside, okay? We need to type in, like we did before, declare, followed by the identifier, which is essentially the name of the array. Let's call it num array, okay? But here's where things get interesting. Now, in an array, we store essentially two values in order to navigate around it. One, and the first one is the row, so the range of rows. In this case, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so it would be 1, 2, 5, comma, the range of columns, so 1, 2, 3, 4, so 1 to 4. Now, all that's left is to say of what data type it is, so let's imagine that it's of integer, okay? Now, essentially, this has created what we can see up here. Okay. Now, what if I was to start filling it in, starting to give it values? Well, if you're going to work with two-dimensional arrays, I strongly recommend, I really do, for you to draw it down. Make sure that if you are going to work with two-dimensional arrays, draw it down and insert the indexes in each box. So for example, the index here would be 1 as a row, 1 as a column. In the row next to, in the column next to it would be 1 again for the row, 2 as the column, and so forth and so forth. For the next row, it would be 2, 1, because we're at row 2 at column 1, and so forth and so forth. So here it is. And then it would go something along the lines of that. And if we keep on going, whoops. And the last one, whoops. Okay, so these are all the positions of this exact array. The first number to the left is the row number, and the one to the right is the column number. Now, let's imagine that you need to fill this array in. There's two ways to do it. My preference is to go across and then to the next row. Now, that doesn't mean you can't start from the top, move all the way down, and then to the next column, like so. Okay. Now, for the sake of the example, we're going to imagine that we're going to fill this array in with a bunch of random numbers, okay, going across. So in order to do this, we need two for loops. The first for loop, here it is, for, we'll call it row 1 to 6, okay, and we need a nested for loop for column 1, to 4. Okay. Now, we're pretty much set up to go. The only thing that's left is to provide a prompt. So the prompt would be output, enter a number, and then input into our array, which is called num, at positions row, comma, column. Now, I'm going to say next column, next row, and we're going to dry run this so that you can see exactly how this works. So here, I'm going to say I have a variable for row and a variable for column. Okay, and every time this program runs, we are going to be updating the current values. Okay, so and I'm also going to put my array row, comma, column, so that you can see. Actually, we don't need this. We don't need this. Okay. Now, let's imagine we're dry running this, and we want to see where the first piece of data will be inserted. Now, when the program begins, row will be equal to 1, and then we will enter the second for loop, and column will also be equal to 1. That means that our current position, our current position right now would be 1, 1, which means that we are looking at this box right here. Okay, so when we see the enter a number and the input statement here, it means that whatever number we write will be inserted in this specific location. Now, when this line is executed and we go to next column, column will now become 2. So this will now become 2. Okay, like so. And the current position will become 1, 2, like so. Okay, when this is executed again, we will come back to this for loop, and the current value of the column will become 3, and this will also get scratched out. Okay, so this means that the current position will be, 3. So we've done these two, and now we've just finished this one. Okay. Now, once this line is executed, we'll come to the for loop again. The column number will become 4. The 3 will get removed. Okay, and the current position will be 4. So we've just reached the end of the first row. Now, once this line is executed now, next column will become 5. This means that we are out of bounds for this for loop, which means that we will go to next row this time. Okay, and row will become from 1, it will become 2. So we'll get rid of that, like so. And now the for loop is restarting. So the for loop will have a value of 1 again. Okay, like so. Okay, now the current position will become 2, 1. Since row is 2, column is 1, we are now looking at this position. Now this will cycle on and on and on until we reach the end of this row and then start a new one. Okay, now this is essentially me searching a two-dimensional array horizontally. Okay, while you're doing this, I strongly recommend you draw the table and the coordinates. Okay, and when it comes to the inner loop, just do this part, the current position. See, does it match my horizontal positions? Okay, now let's imagine that we're going to be doing the same thing, okay, but instead of going horizontally, we'll go downwards. Okay, so here's my array. Okay, let's get rid of the formatting here. Let's make it black again. Okay, and instead of going across, we'll go downwards, okay, like this. Okay, now, in order to do this, now instead of using the row as my outer loop, we're going to use the column. So I'm going to say for column 1, 2, 4, and then for row 1, 2, 5. Now again, if I'm not sure, okay, I'm just going to write here what we need to check. Column, comma, row. Okay, now this will be equal, the first time this will run, this will be equal to, let's put a next row, next column, and let's dry run it. So let's put this actually in a separate text box. Let's do what we did here. Let's copy this, copy, paste, we'll have it here, and I think we had an output, enter num, And we need an input num row, comma, column this time. All right, and let's clear everything up. Let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of all this and see how we will get along with it. Okay, so the first time the first for loop will run, the column will now be equal to 1, and then we'll move into the inner loop, which uses the row as a counter, and that will also be equal to 1. So that means that the first position will be 1, 1. So we're looking at this box. Okay, so here it is. Nice bright red. Okay, now the moment this line is executed, we'll come to the top of the inner loop, and row will now become 2. Okay, actually, let's do what we did before. Let's scratch this one out. Okay, the column will remain unchanged. Okay, and that means that row will become 2 and column will become 1. So we've done this one. Effectively, we've done a linear search, but via each column this time. Okay. Right, you might need to use any of these methods, any of these two methods. It doesn't matter which one you're going to use. In some situations, it's better to go across. In some situations, it's better to go downwards. It's up to you. But the trick behind this is to make sure that you draw it and you make sure that you do something along the lines of what I did here. Test it out. Right, I hope this was helpful. See you in the next one.